Now we are. Good. We're live. All right. Um, Here we go. We are jumping into things here. Tonight in Revelation, we are moving along. We're at just about like I guess somewhere right around the halfway point right now. I guess maybe a little more than half, depending on how you slice it. But we're going to be in chapter 13 tonight. As I am anticipating things to go, we will be covering each of the last 9 chapters in about 2 sessions. So that'll be somewhere around 18 sessions left for those of you who were wondering and asking about that. So I know that chapter 13 for sure will be this week and next week. We will be looking at 2 different beasts, the beast out of the sea and the beast out of the land. And at this point, you all should be quite familiar with the imagery of the sea and the land. Pop quiz. The sea is?
The sea of humanity.
Gentiles. Thanks, AJ. Good job. And the land is? The Jews. Wow, he actually pays attention up there. Who knew? So we have 2 beasts that will be here in chapter 13, and this is when we start getting into all kinds of the juicy stuff about the mark of the beast and the 666 and all of that. That will be next time that we get together next week. But for now, we're going to talk about the beast out of the sea, our reminder of the purpose of the book of Revelation, which is to remind God's suffering people of the victory of Jesus Christ over the power of Satan. That is the purpose. Jesus wins, the devil loses. Here is our recap as it continues to grow and expand. We might have a condensed version of this the next time around because I'm running out of space for lines here. So there you have it. That's what we have been going through, our just very flyby overview of this whole thing with the churches and the seals and the trumpets. We are there. We're in kind of the wake of the 7th trump, so to speak, as this section here is another one of those asides. As chapters 12, 13, and 14, you have this interlude, and what you have, as most commentators understand it, is in chapters 12 and 13, it is a look back to the events of the Great Tribulation, and then in 14, it's a look forward to the reign of Christ, kind of like an intermission here, right in the middle of the book, a little intermission with a summary kind of some of the main events of the whole book. So we will be starting in chapter 13, and this looking back to the time of the Great Tribulation. So we are talking about here in chapter 13 the time of the Great Tribulation. And we will be looking at tonight the beast out of the sea. And this is what it says in Revelation chapter, I didn't change the chapter number. Man. I have a template that I just import each week so that it's less work for me. And I didn't change the chapter number. So this is 13. I'm very sorry. I'm just realizing this. All night it will say chapter 12, but all night we will be in chapter 13. And in Revelation chapter 13, and starting in verse 1, it says, the dragon, and this is the dragon that was waiting there, if you remember, to devour the offspring of the woman. This is the dragon, Satan. The dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. It had 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 crowns on its horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. There it goes. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. People worshiped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast. And they also worshiped the beast and asked, "Who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it?" Okay, so this very interesting vision now. We move from the woman, the sign in the heavens, and the woman, and she's about to give birth. And as she gives birth, the dragon's waiting to consume her child. But the child is picked up and carried off to a place of safety. So now the beast is standing there, or the dragon. I was going to eat this thing, and now it's gone. Now what do I do? And up from the sea rises this beast, this very, very curious and interesting beast. And we're going to look at our two different views here, the preterist and the futurist view. So the preterist, again, looking for the first century fulfillment of this, all of this happening in the time of John, in the time of his life, the first century there, sometime around 70 AD. The preterist view here. Many scholars prefer the textual reading, "he stood," instead of "he stood," instead of "I stood," rather, "he stood." So, and you can read it either way. It actually works in the Greek that it can be either way, either he or I. And many prefer "he stood," which is to say the dragon. This is not unimportant. The dragon, foiled in his attempt to destroy the woman and her seed, stations himself on the sands of the sea, looking out for a potent auxiliary enlisted in his service. So this is saying that the focus is still on the dragon, who's now the dragon is standing there. His little meal that he was going to have is gone. So it is actually kind of from the perspective of the dragon here. Perhaps most interpreters are going to, I don't know what you guys have in your Bibles as you're following along, but most of you are going to have "I stood" in your English translation there. So there's a little bit of controversy there. But nonetheless, the symbol of the sea is generally regarded as an emblem of the Gentile world. Here we go. From which Daniel's 4 beasts arose. And this is from Daniel chapter 7. And in verse 1, so it is a Gentile power that is here represented by a beast, together with the information about this beast given in chapter 17. Most expositors have found it relatively easy to decode the symbolism. Relatively easy. So this is from Daniel chapter 7. So if you want to keep a finger there in Revelation 13 and flip over to Daniel 7, somewhere near the middle of your Bible. And there's a little bit of introductory remarks there in verses 1 through 3, just about he's having this vision and kind of talking about how it happens. But then he starts to describe the vision that he has in verse 4. He says that he sees these creatures. The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being. And the mind of a human was given to it. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, "Get up and eat your fill of flesh." After that, I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard. And on its back, it had 4 wings, like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. So the parallels here between this vision that Daniel has and what John is seeing are pretty striking. Probably the main point of difference is that what Daniel sees are 4 separate beasts representing 4 separate world kingdoms, those being Babylon, Persia, the Greek Empire, and Rome. We'll go with it. I'm not sure if it is. I think I have it on a slide coming up. I was trying to pull it. Off the top of my head. I believe they're the 4 empires that preceded Rome. And then what you have in John's vision is he sees one beast, but the one beast has all of these characteristics. It looks like a combination of all four of these, which is interesting because then it gets you thinking about this as kind of a one world order kind of thing. It is all of the nations, all of the previous nations coming together as one singular beast, which is interesting. But this is where we see this coming, and I believe I have an explanatory bit here in just a moment. But who is this beast? And this is John's beast, not Daniel's. But this beast, says David Chilton, is not just an institution, we would say like the Roman Empire, but a person. Specifically, as we shall see in the Emperor Nero. This is because, particularly the way the Bible looks at things, the two could be considered as one. So you could have this beast representing both the Roman Empire and Nero simultaneously. And that is because Rome was, to some extent, covenantally identified with its leader as the human race was with Adam. So we have biblical precedents for this. You can look at Adam, and in Adam you see the sum total of all of humanity. Adam, his name actually means mankind. And he is the sum total of mankind when he is created. So he is our federal head. As goes Adam, so goes all the rest of us. As goes Nero, so goes the Roman Empire. So the empire was embodied and represented in the reigning Caesar at that time, in the time when, if the preterists are dating this, sometime around the late 60s, that's going to be Nero, is going to be the emperor of Rome at that time. Thus, St. John's prophecy can shift back and forth between them or consider them both together under the same designation. So that's a reasonable interpretation, that the beast can be either the man Nero or the entire order that he kind of represents. And I mean, we really see that with most governments and institutions, that there is usually some kind of figurehead, and that figurehead is representative of the larger body. So, a alternate and similar kind of opinion here from Milton Terry. We should keep in mind that in all this prophetic symbolism, we have before us the Roman Empire as the persecuting power. This apocalypse is not concerned about the history of Rome. The beast is not a symbol of Rome, but of the great Roman world power conceived as the organ of the old serpent, the devil, to persecute the scattered saints of God. So essentially what he's saying is, yes, Rome is the current form that this beast is taking, but really what we're looking at here is Satan. Satan is using the Roman Empire at this time, but what lies under the surface is something satanic. This, of course, is what Paul says in Ephesians, that we wrestle not with flesh and blood, but with principalities and powers, that while our struggle manifests in conflict between human beings, what is at the core of that conflict? All of that conflict starts in the spiritual realm before it makes it to the physical, and this is simply what Terry is saying here, that this is really just a picture of Satan being manifest in the Roman Empire. It has been observed that the beast draws together features of each of Daniel's four beasts. Here you go. The first, Babylon, was represented as a lion. This beast has a mouth like the mouth of a lion. So Babylon, in the past, represented by a lion. You actually see lots of inscriptions of lions in ancient Babylonian carvings and things like that. The lion was prominent in a lot of their artwork. So you have Babylon and a lion being associated. But it is interesting that when Paul was discussing his release from imprisonment under Nero, he remarked, I was delivered out of the mouth of the lion. So you could have this kind of reiteration now of the Roman Empire using the same sorts of imagery as you had with Babylon. And I think that further description, it's coming still. It has puzzled many that one of the beast's heads had been mortally wounded, but the wound had healed so that the beast lived on. So this is definitely a very, very, no matter what interpretive position you're taking, it says that the beast received a mortal wound in its head. Seems like it died, and then seems to resurrect. So very challenging for anybody to figure out exactly what is going on here. But for the preterists, who say this all happened in the first century, if Nero is the head mortally wounded, it is not he who personally survives the wound, but the beast that survives the wounding of one of its heads. And the death of Nero, the Roman Empire was thrown into violent convulsions of civil war and anarchy, in which 3 emperors succeeded one another within a single year. If you're not familiar with the timeline of the Roman emperors, I had to memorize that for one of my seminars. It was going to be on a test. And you had to have the names and the dates of all of them, and you move all the way down, and most of them have a pretty good decade or more that they're reigning, and then you get to Nero, and Nero dies, and then you have these 3 guys who, within the space of 1 year, end up taking power, getting assassinated by the other guy. That guy takes power, he gets assassinated by somebody else. He takes power, assassinated. Happens 3 times there until the 4th guy after Nero lasts for only a few years, but much longer than a few months. But anyway, you had that kind of, it looked like the empire was kind of on the cusp of destruction right there. So that could be what is being referred to here. Historians consider it astonishing that the empire stabilized and survived this period that might easily have spelled the end of the imperial rule. Thus, the recovery of the empire under Vespasian was a marvel to all. The beast, the Roman Empire, had survived the mortal wounding of one of its heads, Nero. So Nero as a head, mortally wounded, but the empire still endures. The beast still endures. That would be their interpretation, how you explain the beast being wounded but still surviving. And David Clark says it like this: if the beast is the Caesar dynasty, as it evidently is, then the head or king with the deadly wound was clearly Julius Caesar. So he's saying Julius Caesar, not Nero, the founder of the empire. And the wound of that head, the killing of Julius Caesar, did not kill the beast at all. The deadly wound has healed. Though Julius Caesar was killed as a protest against autocracy, it did not destroy it in the least. The empire lived on, and Julius was followed by other Caesars more autocratic than he would have dared to be. So that, probably a more kind of likely interpretation of this beast system, the start of the system, this Roman Empire started by Julius Caesar, the head of the system who's killed, but the system endures. It lives on through all of these other guys who end up going on to be much, much worse than Julius Caesar. So that's an interpretation of what might have happened there. Another explanation may be that the mortal wound of the Roman Empire was delivered by the phenomenal success of the gospel in the early days. This is getting much more, I think, to some degree, symbolic here. But David Chilton says, so he's saying that the gospel penetrating into Rome was kind of the mortal wound. Members of Caesar's own household came into the faith. Paul talks about this, of course, in Philippians. In fact, Tiberius Caesar even formally requested that the Roman Senate officially acknowledge Christ's divinity. The beast had received the head wound, the wound unto death, yet it still lived. The reality, of course, was that Christ had defeated the dragon and the beast, but the implications of his victory still had to be worked out. The saints had yet to overcome and take possession. So it could be purely symbolic, just in that as Jesus' death on the cross was a mortal wound to the enemy still endures. Again, that already but not yet sort of idea. So the worship of the dragon and of the beast refers to the statism that characterized much of the empire, especially in Asia Minor, where temples to Caesars abounded. We will come back to this, but if you were here at the very beginning of this, when we were talking about the 7 churches and the letters to the 7 churches, several of the churches were commended because they did not bow down and worship the Caesars of those days. So there was an imperial cult. There was whoever was the reigning emperor at the time was worshipped and deified. We'll talk about this as we move on here a little bit later. But anyway, that could be what's being referred to there when it's talking about the worship. For the futurist, looking for a fulfillment yet to come here. The majority of commentators take the sea as symbolic of the disordered and confused life of the Gentile nations of the world. So again, this beast arising out of the Gentile nations, having something to do with the Gentiles. The fact that the beast rises out of the sea is taken by many to indicate that he comes from the great mass of humanity, namely the Gentile powers of the world. Others take it as a reference to the Mediterranean, namely that the beast will arise from the Mediterranean area. Probably both are true in that the beast is a Gentile and does come from the Mediterranean scene. So we are talking here, this beast, about the Antichrist as this will be fleshed out more and more as we move through this. And then people have always been, it's been a question on the minds of Christians for hundreds, even thousands of years. Who is the Antichrist? Who is the man of lawlessness? Where does he come from? And of course, as John is writing, when he's talking about the sea, in the Jewish culture, in the ancient Near East kind of Jewish culture, if they're talking about the sea, almost certainly going to be the Sea of Galilee. But as the gospel is expanding now around this whole area of Asia Minor, anytime you see a map, I don't have a map here for this slide, but it is the Mediterranean Sea that is essentially the center of the world at that point. All of the places around the Mediterranean Sea are those areas that are being Hellenized, that are being turned kind of into this Greco-Roman culture, and where that was the birthplace of the Christian faith right there around the Mediterranean Sea. So referring to the sea, it could be that this is both a Gentile and someone who actually comes up from the Mediterranean area, and there are lots of countries around there that could host candidates for who could be the Antichrist. We'll talk more about that as we go. But futurists also make the connection of the lion symbolism with the Roman Empire, so it is not just the preterists that see that, but the futurists also. For John, the beast was the Roman Empire as persecutor of the church. Yet the beast is more than the Roman Empire. The beast has always been and will be in final intensified manifestation, the deification of secular authority. So again, this pointing to a kind of more a spiritual enemy here than it is any kind of actual governmental or empire, that it is actually, we're getting to the root cause, and that is the deification of secular authority. This will be expanded as we continue to go here too. The beast is both Rome and the eschatological Antichrist, and we might add any demonic power which the church must face in her entire history. So there is and has been from the very beginning in the garden after the fall, and God's handing out curses, and you get that, what is known as the proto-evangelium in Genesis 3:15, and he talks about the seed of the woman and the seed of the snake, and I will put enmity between your seed and hers, and you will strike his heel, but he will crush your head. This cosmic drama, this cosmic conflict has been presented at the very beginning of the story of humanity, and it is the people of God versus the powers of Satan. And that has been going on from the very beginning. So what Ladd is saying here is that this is just one iteration of the conflict between Satan and the people of God. You can say it is Rome, but it's also any system that stands against God's kingdom. So talking about systems, but the beast may be an individual. It may be referring to an individual, and this, of course, would be the Antichrist if we're talking about an individual. This passage is, first of all, a revelation of the revived Roman Empire in its period of worldwide dominion, but more especially, this paragraph directs attention to the evil character who exercises satanic power as the world dictator. So, Gabalion is saying that this is actually the Antichrist. He's saying this beast here is not a system, it is a person. And it is this character, this satanic character who shows up on the world scene. And this from Ironside: after the church has been caught up to meet the Lord, one man will arise who will combine in himself the statesmanship of a Caesar, the military genius of a Napoleon, and the personal attractiveness of a Chesterfield. This man will head a combination of 10 powers formed, as before mentioned, from the nations that have sprung out of the old Roman Empire. So again, the combination of all of these things being identified there in the first century with Rome, and the 10 horns presumably having to do with 10 different nations that are all going to come together in league, and this one guy is essentially going to be at the head of that. So again, this is where we get the idea of the kind of one world government that will appear in the last days. And we will talk some about how something like that might happen, because I don't know if you've looked around the world today, but to consider the whole world linking arms and coming together, and everybody in the world just putting aside their differences to come under the leadership of one person, I don't know what would have to happen in order for something like that to take place. It would have to be truly remarkable. Here you go. In Daniel 7, the lion was Babylon, the bear Medo-Persia, the leopard Macedonia or Greece, and the 10-horned beast was Rome. Jim Brown. The animal-like traits of the beast combine the components of all four of Daniel's beasts. So again, got a little ahead of myself there, but this one beast having the characteristics of those four. This revived Roman Empire is an amalgamation of parts of the previous world empires. The preceding ones are absorbed by the last, the Roman Empire. The 10 horns are the 10 kingdoms which will exist in that empire. The heads represent the 7 forms of government which have characterized the empire in the past. The 7th becomes the 8th. So essentially, you have this League of Nations that comes together. They all end up giving their power and their authority. We'll see this to the beast, who assumes authority of essentially the whole world and then has his way with everything. But all of those, of course, all of those areas, they're right in that Mediterranean area that we were talking about before. So Babylon, Medo-Persia, Macedonia, and Rome, all right there in that area. Unlike the ancient Roman Empire and all others that have sought to bring all nations under their authority, the revived Roman Empire will succeed in winning the allegiance and admiration of the whole world. As writes Walter Scott, the authority of the dragon and his far-reaching influence go far beyond the geographical limits of the 10 kingdoms. The beast to whom he delegates his power exercises a commanding influence all over the earth, reaching even to the limits of heathendom. This was the first time I ever came across the word heathendom. But this, the authority of the dragon, so Satan, which is given to the beast, the Antichrist, it is far-reaching, and it reaches beyond just the limits of the 10 kingdoms, but to the entire world. So there will be the power of this dragon is going to reach the furthest corners of the earth. Heathendom, likely referring to primitive peoples still around the earth, even the unreached peoples. So we're trying to get to them before Satan does. The world's admiration of the beast stems from his amazing recovery from a deadly wound. This could refer to a rising from the dead, possibly after an assassination. This is a common view among futurists. So, of course, for the futurists looking for this to come, there is an Antichrist, and perhaps it is that the Antichrist, someone tries to assassinate the Antichrist. They try to kill him, and he sustains a mortal wound to the head, perhaps a gunshot. Perhaps somebody tries to pull a JFK on this guy, and perhaps it's even caught on video, and perhaps this guy perhaps by the power of Satan or something. If Satan has the power to reconstruct someone's skull and brains, does something like that, or could be a gross counterfeit. In 11:7 of Revelation, he was seen coming out of the abyss, and that coincides with his restoration to life. He apparently actually dies, descends to the abyss, and returns to life. The world understandably wonders after him. So it's very challenging for the futurist because, again, there is some kind of trickery going on here if this is a work of the devil. Because the devil cannot perform miracles. The devil can perform trickery. The devil can do things that might look miraculous to us, but the devil cannot give life. The devil cannot, construct or reconstruct a human being. So if this is a man who suffers some kind of mortal wound, the only person who can raise anybody back from the dead is God himself. So then there is either some kind of deception that's going on here where he isn't actually killed, but it appears that he's killed. But then it's kind of interesting because John seems to be talking about this event as taking place emphatically, that it actually happens, that the guy actually dies and is actually raised back to life. So everybody struggles with coming up with an answer for this somehow. We're not entirely sure what's going to happen, but I will just warn you, if ever you should see somebody sustain a mortal head wound and they come back to life and people start celebrating that person, run far away. The dispensationalist, yes, the dispensationalist variety of the futurist camp are those who believe that the rapture precedes all of these events. So that we would not be here. That is an interpretation and opinion. Lord willing, that's the right one. Lord willing, we're all gone. But should you still be around? Should we all still be around? Watch out. Just as Jesus was declared to be the Son of God by his resurrection from the dead, you can read about that in Romans and many other places. So, in the times of the Antichrist, stress will be laid on the fact that though this first beast had received a death stroke, nevertheless he had lived again, and that therefore he had established his right to claim divine majesty and worship. So we're going to talk about this the next time that we get together. You essentially have this unholy trinity with the dragon, which is Satan, the Antichrist, and the false prophet, who all kind of mirror the work of God the Father, of Jesus, and of the Holy Spirit. So Satan trying to impersonate God, even God in his Trinitarian form, and having a member of this satanic Trinity to match the real divine Trinity. And the Antichrist, being an impersonation of Jesus, tries to impersonate him through and through, even to the point of being killed and raising back to life, which would, of course, elicit worship if you didn't know any better. If you knew somebody who died and raised themselves back to life, you would worship them, right? Right, Jesus. If it happens again, though, probably not. So, some futurists find a similar interpretation, as do some preterists. The wounding of one of the heads seems instead to be a reference to the fact that the Roman Empire, as such, seemingly died and is now going to be revived. So again, if you're taking this as some kind of representation of a system and not an individual, then it would be the Roman Empire, which, for all intents and purposes, is gone, yet it endures through essentially the Roman Catholic Church still. And while they are not necessarily a governmental authority right now, something like that could happen. They could rise back into political power. I mean, they have a lot of political power too, but it's not officially any kind of sovereign state or anything like that. So now the blasphemy and the war that comes from the beast. And back in chapter 13, and starting in verse 5, it says, "The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies and to exercise its authority for 42 months, a familiar length of time. It opened its mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. It was given power to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them, and it was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain before the creation of the world. Whoever has ears, let them hear. If anyone is to go into captivity they will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword they will be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people." So, this beast is given a mouth to blaspheme, and it blasphemes. And it says that all of the inhabitants of the earth will worship and go after the beast, all except those whose names have been written in the Lamb's book of life. The Lamb that was slain before the foundations of the earth, and some English translations actually have the book of the Lamb written before the foundations of the earth. So the Lamb is slain before the foundations of the earth. That is for certain. Your name is in the book before the foundations of the earth. We talked about this a few weeks ago on Sunday morning. You can go back and revisit that if you want to. But here we come back to this emperor worship. All of the emperors permitted, encouraged, or enforced the worship of themselves, at least in their assumption of divine titles like Sabbatos, meaning the one to be worshipped, and Divus, Deus, and Theos, all meaning God. Thus, we read of the beast blasphemies. It is further indicated that all who dwell on the earth or land participate in his worship. So the preterist, again, saying, who is this beast that is uttering blasphemies and people are worshiping him? Well, in the first century, it wouldn't be hard to look around and say, oh, well, that's just the emperor. That's the emperor calling himself God. Actually stamped on the back of these coins right here, a coin from the first century. You have there Augustus Caesar, the first true emperor of Rome after Julius Caesar. Augustus, the nephew of Caesar, whom he adopted, who became the first emperor of the Roman Empire. And then on the back there, you have Divus, and it is Julius there. So that is basically the god. He is, as the lore went, Augustus was the son of God. He was the son of the god Julius. There is a picture of a comet there because, as the lore goes, Julius Caesar fell down from heaven, like a comet. There was some comet associated with his birth, and he was understood to be a god, and Augustus was the son of God. And they stamped it on the back of their coins. So again, first century, you're looking around for a fulfillment of this, and you say, well, that's real easy. Look at that guy claiming to be God and telling everyone that they have to worship him. He's got a temple built to himself over here. People are coming in and doing acts of worship in the temple. They're giving them money. They're doing all these things. We got a guy. There's our beast. There's people worshiping him. Worship, of course, can be understood in terms of everyday practical allegiance and obedience. This is certainly what our spiritual worship to God is said to be in Romans 12, 1-2. That is what Paul says, that our minds and our lives ought to be transformed and conformed to the image of Christ, and this is our spiritual act of worship, that it is the way in which we live. We live in allegiance with Jesus, and us living in allegiance with him is our worship of him. So then, conversely, if you are living in allegiance to the Roman state and the Roman Empire, if you're living in accord with what they're asking you to do, then you are worshiping them by your lifestyle. That's a biblical principle. The Jews, by refusing allegiance to Christ and choosing allegiance to Caesar, became guilty of worshiping the beast. Given the opportunity to own Christ as their king before Pilate, the Jews proclaimed, "We have no king but Caesar." So they blasphemed. They bought into it. They said Caesar's king, not God. If you remember that striking comment that they made, we covered that in John back sometime last year sometime. But with this cry, Judaism was, in the person of its representatives, guilty of denial of God, of blasphemy, of apostasy. It committed suicide. So the Jews in particular, but of course the whole world at large, anyone involved in the imperial cult would have been guilty of basically worshiping the devil. If the devil is giving his power to this system, and if the devil is the one who is behind that system, and just as a general principle, the devil is the one who is behind the worship of anything that is not God. If anything is being worshiped that is not God, there is a facade there of that thing, and then right behind that thing is the devil. And if you are worshiping anything that is not God, you are worshiping the devil. He just has a clever disguise on. That's how that goes. So, the beast was permitted by God to make war with the saints and to overcome them. This war took the form of persecution of the church by the Roman Empire, and especially by Nero, shortly before the destruction of Jerusalem. At this point, it's getting somewhat tiresome talking about the persecution of the Christians by Nero, but here is an excerpt from David Clark. The devil had gone to make war or to persecute the seed of the woman, which keep the commandments of God. Accordingly, he does it through this great world power, the Empire of Rome. Rome becomes the devil's agent. History tells us of the persecution of Rome, how Paul was beheaded and Peter crucified head downwards, how the Christians were thrown to the lions, exposed to the cold, drowned in rivers, thrown into cauldrons of boiling oil, daubed with pitch and burned for torchlight, how every conceivable torture was inflicted on them, how all the might and power of the Roman Empire were exerted to extirpate them till the church at length conquered its persecutor. So, yes, the beast making war against the church is something that has been going on since the church was the church, which started right after the resurrection of Jesus. The Christians have been being persecuted. So the preterist, seeing that fulfillment there, and for the futurist, if you have to look for a future fulfillment of the beast making war against the people of God, you're going to be looking for these sorts of things to be happening again at some point in the future. We'll get to that in a moment. But the time of 42 months is again mentioned here. You saw that right at the top. The period of 42 months is a symbolic figure in prophetic language signifying a time of trouble, when the enemies of God are in power and when judgment is being poured out while God's people wait for the coming of the kingdom. Its prophetic usage is not only literal, although it is interesting, it's not primarily, literal, although it is interesting that Nero's persecution of the church did in fact last a full 42 months, from the middle of November 64 to the beginning of June 68. This period of 42 months thus corresponds, but is not necessarily identical to the 42 months, 1,260 days of 11 and times time and half a time of 1214. So you can find a corollary there, and we have covered that bit about the 42 months and the persecution of Nero in the past. So that is there. You can find 42 months of intense persecution in the first century for the preterist. Now, the futurist view of this, the 42 months is the second half of the tribulation period, which portion is usually called the Great Tribulation. We talked about this the last time that we got together, but it is not necessarily to limit the career of the beast to this period. From John Wolford, it is probable that the person who heeds the revived Roman Empire comes into power before the beginning of the entire 7-year period of Daniel 9:27. If you remember Daniel's 70th week, we talked about that. And as such, enters into covenant with the Jewish people. His role as world ruler over all nations, however, does not begin until the time of the Great Tribulation. From that point, he continues 42 months until the second coming of Christ terminates his reign. So essentially what he's saying is those 7 years do not necessarily, they don't have to directly correspond to the influence of the Antichrist on the earth. He could come into some kind of power or onto the world scene sometime before those 7 years start. Then those 7 years can start. He makes a treaty with the nation of Israel. And if you're paying attention to geopolitics right now, you can see how we're on a trajectory here that with just a few more kind of events taking place over there in the Middle East, there might be need for a treaty with the nation of Israel soon, that they might be looking for some kind of peace deal. And someone might rise into power to say, yeah, let's put an end to all of this madness. I don't know if you're paying attention to the news at all right now, but all across the country right now, as it is time for our college students to be graduating, graduations are being canceled on all kinds of college campuses because there are people who are taking over campuses all across the United States for the Free Palestine movement. And a large, well, really not so large a demographic, but a very loud demographic and a squeaky demographic are making a big fuss right now in support of Palestine. And whether or not they're acknowledging it or they're really kind of supporting Hamas at the same time, which is a terrorist organization, and they're taking over buildings in schools. Graduations are being canceled, which should be going on this weekend because there are people demonstrating on campuses. So it's an interesting thing that's taking place here in America, where you have a large contingent of people who are advocating for the enemies of Israel right now. They're making themselves known. And really, they represent a much larger group who just won't come right out and say it because it is not politically expedient to take that position. So there are many more people who agree with what these people are saying. They just won't come right out and say it. But they'll let those people say it. You see those guys over there? You see how mad they are? Listen to them. We're not saying that. I wouldn't say that. But those guys are. Put some cameras on them. Put them on the news. That the latter part of the beast's career, characterized by blasphemies, connects him to the little horn of Daniel 7. So again, this connection here with Daniel 7, who had a mouth speaking pompous words, and with the man of sin who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God. So you have another tie there basically to Daniel. The future is picking up on this too. But the God whom he denies has limited his sway, for power will be given him only to continue 42 months, that is for 3.5 years, the last half of Daniel's 70 weeks, his 70th week. So, again, the Great Tribulation, when it gets really, really bad, is just in that last section, that last half of the 7 years. The Great Tribulation will be the hardest times of persecution the Jews have ever known. Of course, the futurists, again, most of them believing that the Christian contingent will be out of here. So you will have only the Jews left, and then presumably you will have some converts. You will have some people who have been hanging around in the church, maybe. You will have some people who have been friends and family members of Christians, but who have not ever given their lives to Jesus, who have not ever become saved. And then, if indeed a rapture of the church is a thing, when all of the people who were going to church and talking about this Jesus thing and this rapture thing are all gone, and I wasn't really sure how I felt about that or believed about that, people are going to make up their minds really quick. So there would be some Christian converts that you would have. So there would be Christians left even after the rapture, new Christians who did not make the first train. They'll get the next one, and when it comes around. And then you will have Jews. But this will be the greatest persecution of all of them. The beast's war with the saint is to be identified with the dragon's war against the woman and the rest of her offspring in 12:17. So again, it is that same picture of the dragon trying to persecute the woman's child, carried away into safety. All right, who's our next target? These guys right here. This big brother-like dictator, no doubt, through his command of the latest technology, will be able to monitor every human being on earth, seeking to identify every non-compliant citizen. If you aren't aware, this is going on right now, all the time. This is going on. Can't even make this stuff up. As I was preparing these notes, I took a break for a second, and we're talking hours ago. Just a couple hours ago. I was sitting next door, hopped on the old Facebook. I think I got on there for a purpose. I think I was looking for something productive to do, not to waste my time. But as I was scrolling, this popped up in my feed. Mission display. Upgrade your mission space. Modern appeal without breaking the bank. Mission display for more affordable. We just put a missions display out in the foyer. I talked to Mike Offenberg about making the mission display. I did not look up online any missions displays. All right. Hi. To be able to, when we're talking about impersonating God, one of the attributes of God is that God is omnipresent and he is omniscient. That is, God is everywhere and he sees everything. God is everywhere and he sees everything. And if you wanted to impersonate God, one of the things you would have to do is have infinite knowledge, or at least what looks like infinite knowledge of every single person. Now, just only about 10 or 15 years ago, something like this would be quite astonishing, and it would seem like it would have to be a miracle. How could you possibly know everything about everybody? Now, it is very, very obvious how you can know everything about everybody. There are all kinds of little bits that tie into this, interesting portions of information. There is a data center somewhere in Utah. It's this huge, all it is essentially a giant hard drive, which is the size of some 2 or 3 football fields of hard drive space. Now, you know that now you can have a terabyte of memory, which is an incredible amount of memory in, the whatever space of your fingernail or something. They have 2 or 3 football fields full of memory storage, which is, no one knows precisely what it is that they're storing there. It's related to something with some kind of government, FBI or CIA or something like that. But some people have speculated that perhaps they are storing every single digital transmission or transaction that every single person ever makes, so that if at any moment someone wanted to, say put you on trial, and to be able to, you appear before the judge, you appear before the king to give an account for your life, they could say, give me their file. What do we got? Oh, did you say this on this day? Did you do this? Oh, we actually have video right here of you. let's see the video. And they could know everything and see everything and basically make any case against you because we have just been handing them all of this information about ourselves for years and years. So this was just crazy. I mean, this is not the first time. Of course, you guys have all seen things like this before, but it literally just happened a couple hours ago as I was putting this together. So I was like, how fun. So he'll know everything and be everywhere and do everything. In our irreligious and secularized time, it may be hard to imagine all who dwell on earth worshiping anything or anyone. In a very secular and materialistic world, it's weird to think about a religious system that takes over the whole earth. Merrill Tenney says this: the worship of the beast is compulsory, being imposed upon the world by conquest, by propaganda, by lying miracles, and by social and economic pressure. All of these things coming, or here already. The coercion constitutes the last great attempt to unify all religions under one general system with a powerful, visible, personal object of worship, who is also the head of the state and in whose hands rests the power of life and death over his subjects. So, there will be according to futurists, a man who rises to the head of this whole thing and who stands in a place where everyone worships him. And this might be kind of difficult, for us to wrap our minds around, but it's not really that difficult to wrap your mind around. Is it? This is a picture of, this is a bunch of teenagers at a worship service. They're worshiping God at a worship service. Here's a picture of a bunch of other people at a worship service. They have someone there that they're worshiping. I mean, there's no other way to call it. They're screaming their praise and adulation for this person. Should this person get close enough where they could touch them, they would feel overwhelmed that they had touched. I got to touch Beyonce. It's a worship service. Here's another worship service. A bunch of people there worshiping at the altar of Taylor Swift. The same sort of thing is going on there. Or how about this one? We got hands raised. We got people crying out, "Save us, save us. We need your help. You can do it. You're the one. You're the one who can fix it." How about this one? Looks like a lot of people putting their faith in, looking for salvation. Someone save us. You save us. And we worship, and we chant, and we hold signs, and we place our faith in, and we believe. And it's not that difficult to think how in the last days, a large group of people could put their faith in a person instead of the person of Jesus. And it is happening all around us in a number of ways. Now, what will still be very, very interesting and impressive is if you could get these people and these people to worship the same guy. That would be pretty impressive. However, we will wait and see exactly how that plays out. But I would just caution everybody to be careful where you are placing your faith and your allegiance and your worship. To just be careful about that. The call here, if anyone has an ear, let him hear, resembles the warning at the end of each of the 7 letters of chapters 2 and 3, except that the earlier statements ended with the additional phrase, what the Spirit says to the churches. So in chapters 2 and 3, it says, if anyone has an ear to hear, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Here in 13, it just says, if anyone has an ear to hear, let them hear. And that last bit is omitted. And John Wolverd says the omission of the phrase unto the churches in 13:9 is most significant and tends to support the teaching that the church, the body of Christ, has previously been raptured and is not in this period. The exhortation in Revelation 13 is much wider. It is to anyone who will listen. And the message is not addressed to the church as such, but to the entire world. And for the futurist, looking for a rapture, a pre-tribulation rapture, this is a point of evidence that they would point to. And it makes sense. Could be that. Again, I'm very much hoping for that. But as we have talked about, as I have mentioned in here in the past, I don't think that there is really enough empirical evidence in the Bible to support any timing for a rapture of the church. So what I tell everybody is believe for, a rapture. You can, but prepare for, that you might have to go through some of the most intense times of persecution. And again, as I have mentioned before, even if we make it out before the Great Tribulation, it does not mean that we could fall into the same circumstances as so many other Christians already are in the world, where we are living under a government who no longer tolerates Christianity, who says that you're not allowed to practice that faith, you're not allowed to practice that religion, and it might cost you your freedom, it might even cost you your life, and that scenario does not have to wait until the Great Tribulation. That is something that we could see in our lives today, and everybody should at least consider in their minds. We have lived in great luxury and comfort in the United States of America, something that has not been afforded to most of the world, and particularly to Christians all around the world from the first century all the way up until now. Horrible things have been happening to our brothers and sisters in Christ. We should not have some kind of expectation that God's going to just spare all of us from that because, well, we're the church, right? They're the church everywhere in the world. They're God's children everywhere in the world. We just have been incredibly fortunate. And hopefully our fortune endures into the future. But we'll see. We'll see how long America looks, how America has looked. I was talking to Bob Vick today, and he's not doing well. Be praying for him. His health is failing him here in his old age, and he was contemplating his mortality as I was talking to him on the phone, and I said, "You, my friend, were the luckiest generation." He's 88 years old. Can't do the math on that, but that means he was born sometime in the 30s? That was the golden age. Man, and he's going to get out of here probably punch his ticket home just before the whole thing blows up. Maybe it doesn't blow up for another 20 or 30 years. It's going to blow up eventually. But I said to him, man, man, God bless you. Thank you for your faithful service to the Lord. And, you got a great homecoming. But, we don't know. We don't know how much more time we have. I become more and more optimistic as I look at my children. Before you have kids, it's like, oh, man. And now with kids, there's like this new hope birthed in you. Like, maybe the country won't burn down in November when this next election happens. Because no one's going to be, you're either going to have half of, no matter who wins, half of the country is going to be really, really upset.
I don't think we can win.
That's the sad sort of state that we're in right now is, yes, who and how is there any kind of win in November? We'll see. We'll see. The Lord has done greater miracles before. So we'll just see what he has in store. But I would encourage you to press in to the Lord, to continue to strengthen your relationship with him. We need him every single day, and I have a sneaking suspicion that will become more and more evident as the days progress. So remember, the victory's already won. This letter is written not to scare us, but to give us encouragement that Jesus has overcome the enemy, and the enemy might flail around and throw a little temper tantrum at the end, but it is short, and our victory is eternal, and the blessing that we have in our relationship with Jesus is eternal, and it cannot be taken away from us. So that is the great hope that we have. That is the great comfort that we rest in, and we will stand and marvel at how this all takes place, no matter what it looks like. Heavenly Father, we thank you, God, for your love for us. We thank you for your care for us. We thank you for the fact that you have a plan, God, and no one can stop your plan. No one can challenge your authority, God. No one can pose any significant threat against you at all, God. People might try, and they might shake their fist at you, and they might take the whole power and all of the resources of the entire earth, God, and try to turn them against you, but it is nothing compared to your strength, compared to your power, God, compared to your authority. And we are blessed that you have called us into alignment with yourself, God, on this side of eternity, that we willingly submit our lives to your authority, God, that we willingly give ourselves over to you, to your leadership, God, and to your love. And we are grateful, God, that you cover us with your grace and with your mercy. And I pray, God, for your children everywhere, God, all across the world, that no matter what our circumstances are, no matter how good things might be, no matter how bad it might seem that things are, God, that you would just be continuing to call each one of us into deeper and deeper fellowship with you, into deeper relationship with you, into greater knowledge of you, God. And that as we start to see the earth shake, God, that we would not feel frightened, that we would not feel alarmed, God, because our homes, our houses have been built on the rock that cannot be shaken. And we're so thankful for that. We're so thankful for you, God. We love you. We look forward to the day when we meet you face to face. But until then, give us the strength. We ask it all in your name.